You all know why you're here, the quest for peace and stability. I've just been told that President Aliyev is not able to join us, so we now have 4 contributors from the platform, each from countries where all of you know very well there are significant challenges on peace and stability. Many of you have first-hand experience. I have said to all 4 of them that we know that you're on the road to peace and stability. I do not want them to say in 4 or 5 minutes at the beginning that everything's going fine, because that's not really the issue that we're talking about and here to address. We want to hear about the challenges, the difficulties, where the international community needs to be more hands-on or more hands-off, respecting the different sovereign pressures in each of the countries. I would urge you to work out in your own minds, as we listen to the first 2 or 3 or 4 interventions, the kind of key questions you would like to put. Many of you will have first-hand experience. So I have said to them no more than 3 minutes, which probably means 4 minutes. After that, I will be quite brutal, because we do have an hour. And those of you who've seen me moderate before know that I do intervene and make sure people keep to the point, because I want to get as many voices as possible. It's very good to see President Karzai and President Musharraf sitting alongside each other. Welcome to you both. And and Barham Salih, of course, the Deputy Prime Minister of Iraq, and Fakhruddin Ahmed from Bangladesh. All of you face incredibly difficult problems. In no order of preference, President Karzai, your view of the challenges you now face in Afghanistan, please.
The challenges we face in Afghanistan are many. Among the most important are the continuation of terrorism in Afghanistan, in our part of the world, and our struggle against it together with the international community. The second most important challenge is the continuation of the plantation of poppies and drug dealing and the presence of the international mafia in that aspect in Afghanistan. The third is Afghanistan's serious difficulty in human resources, in the lack of a capable administration, in the lack of a capable civil service, and in our inability to reach the countryside with the delivery of services as normal countries do. The fourth one is, of course, the legacy of 3 decades of war and destruction and misery for the Afghan people, which we are trying to overcome in a time shorter than it needs. So to overcome these 4 difficulties, Afghanistan is seeking the help of the international community. Afghanistan is seeking the help of the neighbors of Afghanistan. Afghanistan is working hard to rebuild its infrastructure, its roads, its bridges, its schools, its clinics, and also working very hard to raise the capacity of the country to deal with these problems eventually on its own. So those were the problems, and these are the efforts we are undertaking.
Mr. President, just before I move on to Pakistan, how do you define the level of peace and stability you're aspiring to? Because with the NATO mission, for example, they don't believe they can get victory at all. It'll be some level of success. Just help us with a definition of what peace and stability can mean for Afghanistan, briefly, in your final 2 minutes.
Well, peace and stability, of course, as you're right, is quite relative. In case of Afghanistan, peace and stability for us means an end to terrorist activity in Afghanistan, an improved law and order situation for Afghanistan, and an ability in Afghanistan of the Afghan institutions to deliver services to the people on its own. In other words, for Afghanistan to be able eventually to stand on its own feet. That is what we are seeking. Now, if we achieve this bigger objective of the fight against terrorism and get relative stability there from that aspect, Afghanistan will remain to be a poor country. Afghanistan will remain to be a country not as efficient in administration as others perhaps are, but Afghanistan will keep on living and will be a country happy with itself.
President Musharraf, the fact that you're both sitting together, of course, underlines that there's a mutual threat on peace and stability, which is well recognized. I think everyone in this room understands many of the challenges you face, particularly with the election coming up on February the 18th. But can I go to the bullet points? You're here promoting Pakistan at the moment around Europe in 4 countries. You've been in Paris and Brussels. You're going to London tomorrow. Can you give what you think at the moment, theoretically, are achievable levels of peace and stability in your country, given the enormous pressure and at every level in Pakistan on you?
Well, what we are looking at under the present circumstances and in the future are 3 elements. Number 1, ensure the sustenance of the economic growth, and we are on an economic upsurge in Pakistan. Number 2, we must carry on the fight against terrorism and extremism, which is a scourge, which is disturbing our environment. It will have an impact even in the streets of Europe. And the 3rd element, we must go for the elections on the 18th of February. They must be fair, free, fair and transparent and peaceful. And we must ensure a stable government coming into Pakistan subsequently to be able then to address the issue of terrorism and extremism and economic growth, sustaining the economic growth with more strength. These are our immediate challenges. But may I, since you've given me 4 minutes, by the way, may I expand the scope beyond, because I think what is affecting Pakistan is affecting the world also. I thought we need to discuss our quest for peace and stability in the world. I personally feel that the core to this peace and stability in the world is to ensure economic growth and political stability in individual countries. Now, this is affected by the international turbulence, the instability, the conflict around the world. It is affecting political stability and economic growth, especially in the Muslim countries, at varying levels. So therefore, we need to find solutions to those elements. And I would like to recommend 4 elements where the solution lies. Number 1, I would say, we must resolve the political disputes, the existing ones, especially the core being Palestine, because I think that will create effects, indirect effects, on whatever is happening in Lebanon or Afghanistan or terrorism in Pakistan. We must solve these disputes. Then we must continue the fight against terrorism and extremism. And this must be done on a multi-pronged strategy. Fight them militarily, there is a political element to it, and there is a socio-economic element to it. I wouldn't go into the details. We must do that. And then we must ensure the economic growth of countries, now especially the developing countries. And that is where the responsibility of individual governments come in. And may I say, the responsibility of the West comes in, where there are these economic inequities leading to, as I remarked once before, islands of prosperity could be drowned under the oceans of poverty. Let's not allow that to happen. Therefore, the Millennium Development Goals of the United Nations and the ODA commitment of the developed countries must be ensured so that these inequities between North and South reduce. And finally, may I say that we have to build democratic institutions and institutions of good governance within countries. And lastly, may I add, if I still have half a minute, is the interfaith harmony. And I think in this I had proposed a strategy of enlightened moderation, but other proposals of harmony between civilizations, etc., are all very welcome. This is the way forward to bring harmony into the world. So there is a commitment, there has to be a resolve at the individual country level, and there also has to be a resolve internationally.
One point of clarification, Mr. President. Free and fair elections on February the 18th. You used the phrase essence of democracy to the Foreign Affairs Committee of the European Parliament on Monday. What is the subtle difference between the essence of democracy and a free and fair election, which suggests totally open, without any sense of anything going wrong or ballot rigging or anything like that?
Well, there is no conflict at all. Obviously, free and fair elections is an essence of democracy. But when I talk of essence of democracy, I mean a much larger thing. What is democracy? It is empowerment of the people. So first of all, every developing country must ensure empowerment of the people. People of Pakistan were not empowered. We empowered them through a third tier of government, the local government system, where we empowered them financially, administratively, and politically. We empowered the women of Pakistan. They had no seats. Today, the 22% of our National Assembly is women. They have reserved seats at the local government level. They have reserved seats at every tier of government. We have empowered the minorities of Pakistan. They had separate electorates. So the Muslims of Pakistan wouldn't go to the minorities because they would elect their own people. We've given them joint electorates and also duplicated it with seats, reserved seats at every tier of the parliament. This is essence of democracy which we have introduced. And for the first time in the history of Pakistan, the national assemblies, the provincial assemblies, the Senate, the local government have completed their tenure, did well, performed well, put Pakistan on an economic growth of 7% per annum for the last 5 years. Today, even Merrill Lynch says that our growth will be 6.8%. If you see the last page of The Economist, you will see that they are showing Pakistan at 7% growth in spite of everything that may be happening there. So this is the essence of democracy that we've introduced, and we need to sustain it. And obviously, on 18 February, the election must be fair, free, and transparent. And I've added a new word, peaceful. We'll make sure that they are peaceful.
Fakhruddin Ahmed, Chief Advisor to the Prime Minister of Bangladesh. It's a year since emergency regulations, emergency rule, after what you faced on your university campuses, political parties suspended. How does that create peace and stability? Where are you going now? Do you feel confident to move forward in a multi-party pluralist system which will endure?
Just to again remind ourselves, as you said, the government came to power about a year ago under a provision of the Constitution, and they were sworn in under the Constitution. So it's a constitutional government which is continuing, but obviously there are problems that really for which this government came into power. And soon thereafter we said holding a free, fair, credible election is the #1 priority, but for which certain preparations were necessary. First of all, a voters list, which is accepted by everybody because the voters list has been a problem in the previous elections. And then secondly, the challenges remain in terms of the institutions which will underpin democracy for all time and keep it stable. And those institutions are an election commission, which is independent, a public service commission, which is independent, an anti-corruption commission, which is independent, and they go on carrying on their work, and that's really what we have done. And we have also separated the judiciary from the executive. Again, I believe it's an important component of that institution building and institution strengthening that we have initiated. Local government strengthening. Again, I believe that's also part of the separation of powers, that the local governments must be stronger, really, to have democracy at the grassroots level. That's why we had a local government committee which has made recommendations. We are going through the changes to give them additional authority and power. And then really we will hold the elections, as we said, by the end of December 2008 at the latest. But the process of, again, framing the electoral rules, regulations, really to ensure this kind of an election is being done by the Election Commission. And there has been an upsurge of public demand for such changes. That was at the backdrop of our government. And that's why the Election Commission is discussing this with professional bodies, with the media, with the political parties, and will come up with the changes that will then ensure the free, fair, and credible election that we are aiming for. And finally, let me point out that not a single bullet was fired, not a bomb went off during the coming into power or existence of this government, and ever since. Bangladesh has been a peaceful region, a peaceful country. And again, if I may take one more minute to point out that in Bangladesh, a quiet social change has been going on and is going on, which this government is supporting. That change has empowered women through ideas such as microcredit, which was born in Bangladesh, through ideas such as non-formal education. Again, Bangladesh was one of the pioneers. Bangladesh is a country which is on target to achieving the Millennium Development Goals. A couple of them we have achieved. Gender parity in schools, that has already been achieved. In primary enrollment, we have already achieved that. So despite all kinds of limitations of resources, we have made progress and we are continuing to make progress. And this will also remain a challenge for us to ensure a higher growth with equity and ultimately to reduce poverty, and not just to reduce, to just banish poverty once for all. Because with a large number of people not getting the benefits of growth or economic development, there will be some seeds of instability which will remain. So these are the challenges that really we are facing. One last point. People have started asking us that, all right, these institutional changes you have done has been accepted by everybody, but how does it continue into the future? So that will remain a challenge for us to talk to the political parties, to agree and have some kind of a unified view in the country that these changes are fundamental and must continue in the future to ensure democracy and through that to ensure stability.
But I'm wondering whether you feel uncomfortable essentially explaining and defending what's happened in the last year, where the quest for peace and stability and democracy restricts political and trade union activity, prohibits some of the media from publishing anything that might be considered provocative. When Human Rights Watch say politics being banned is rather bizarre in a democracy.
Let me just point out that this is, of course, the country is under emergency rules. And under emergency rules, not all the fundamental rights have been suspended, only a few. And secondly, also let me point out that the media is, I think this is probably has been said by the media personalities, is today freer than any time in the past. Despite some events or incidents on human rights violation. This is something for which we have set up a national human rights, we are about to set up a national human rights commission. We have already passed the law that which no other government has done in the past. So we are taking measures really which will take care of all these that you just pointed out. In terms of political activities, we opened up indoor political activities in Dhaka. That has gone on. I said in my last speech to the nation that we are going to open up political activities, indoor political activities all over the country. And emergency rules, yes, as election draws nearer, we will think about how to remove all the barriers that can then ensure participation by the political parties.
All right. Finally, Barham Salih, we know very well what's happening in your country, and we've seen the transition that's been going on, maybe with good signs coming. But when you look at those critical ambitions of peace and stability, what lessons are you taking away, particularly from the last few months? And can I encourage any of you to get a microphone towards you? Then we can engage in the discussion for the last half hour. Barham Salih.
Well, talking of challenges of transition, Iraq is the ultimate transition, and the challenges that we have faced with in Iraq are truly daunting and profound. We are talking about a process of transition from a country that was ruled by tyranny for decades to what we aspire to be a functioning democracy in the heart of the Islamic Middle East. That is tantamount to changing the course of history for our region. Therefore, one should assess the scale of the challenges in that important context. Over the last year, there has been some positive developments in Iraq. I can say for the first time in a long, long time that maybe Iraq is on the road to win the battle against Islamic fanaticism and religious extremism manifested in the phenomena of Al-Qaeda and the terrorist organizations. What has happened in the Anbar province is quite important. A year ago, many people deemed Anbar lost. Now people speak of reconstruction in Anbar. I dare say if we could win Anbar back, winning the whole of Iraq and making sure that we attain the peace and the stability that we aspire to and we deserve is also possible. Our transition in Iraq is also made difficult. We are part of a very difficult region. This process of transition is affected by all the cross currents, international and regional, issues of Islam, democracy, terrorism, ethno-nationalism, sectarian politics, oil, Iran, the Arab world, the Turkic world, the United States are all at play on Iraqi soil, making our challenge a lot more difficult. But I can say, though the transition has been very difficult, very painful, disappointing at times, not meeting the expectations of Iraqis or of the friends of Iraq outside, I want to tell you that the pains of transition today pale in comparison to the horrors we had to endure under Saddam Hussein. This is very important perspective to retain always when we assess the situation in Iraq. This year will be a crucial year for Iraq. We are now engaged in serious political dialogue among the main political constituents of the country to put together a power-sharing arrangement that can sustain the security gains of the last year. More importantly, we are really focused this year on the economy, because at the end of the day, it will be about jobs, it will be about education, it will be about services, and it will be about the fair distribution of wealth for Iraqis. These are difficult challenges, undoubtedly, but I dare say for the first time in a long, long time, we can be optimistic about the future for Iraq.
If it may sound rather grand, if we're looking for principles or even a model to start aspiring to when it comes to peace and stability, what would you not do again?
I think first and foremost, I would set our expectations right. Many of us thought that with the demise of Saddam Hussein, Iraqis will live happily ever after and democracy will be put in place and nothing to worry. We wanted to blame all our ills on Saddam Hussein. He certainly was the manifestation of the repression, the genocide, and all the trouble that we had to deal with. But removing Saddam Hussein was the easy part, but building a decent, functioning government, democratic government, is the difficult part. We need to understand that this will take time and it will involve a lot of efforts and energy and dedication.
But particularly the lessons, say, of the last year.
The lesson of last year is that military might is not enough to defeat terrorism. It is about politics, it's about inclusiveness, and it is about giving the communities a stake in the fight against terrorism. What made us win Anbar was not just bringing in more troops into Anbar. It was the decision of Arab tribes in the Anbar province to take on Al-Qaeda. Once they rejected Al-Qaeda, Al-Qaeda became denied to that territory, and that is the most important lesson. And the lesson for 2008 will have to be, if we want to sustain those security gains, we need to fix our politics and to bring into place an inclusive political system that will be genuinely representative and balanced for all the communities of Iraq.
And President Karzai, I should ask you, and I'm sure someone will want to ask it, so I'm asking it first. When you hear that and what's going on with the Taliban, is that a good principle we need to open up on here? It's not just about military operations.
Very true.
Good. President would that everything was so simple. President Musharraf, you wanted to come in, then John Shipman. Let's open it up. You've got the microphone. President Musharraf.
I just wanted to reinforce what my brother from Bangladesh had said. We need to understand, with a Western audience, predominantly Western audience sitting in front, how to judge a country. Judge a country through its economic performance, well-being of its people, and its political stability. Please don't judge the country on idealistic, maybe unrealistic, Western perceptions of democracy and human rights. That is where we start going wrong. Now in Bangladesh, we know what they were facing, and I think what the President has said is absolutely the right course. So he is trying to bring democracy, he is trying to address human rights issues, he has to ensure political stability and economic growth. That should be the gauge and not the other.
Nevertheless, what we're trying to do is find those national sovereign definitions of peace and stability. Right, John Shipman, how many microphones do we have? One over there? Okay. Can you make sure it spreads quickly so we don't waste any time? John Shipman.
The International Institute for Strategic Studies has worked with all four of your governments to quietly facilitate quiet diplomacy as between the four of you, and my offer is that we will continue to do so to the degree that you might wish. A question for President Musharraf. What is the vision that you have to work with the new Prime Minister to create a different political dispensation in the federally administered tribal areas, the Fatah, from which so many terrorist difficulties are spawned? And a question for Deputy Prime Minister Salih. You spoke of democracy. When do you think the provincial elections will be held? And because they might become a magnet for more insecurity, what do you say to the proposal sometimes made that the provincial elections should take place on a rolling basis so that additional security can be surged towards those electoral processes in support of democracy?
President Musharraf.
Well, we are going to have the election on the 18th of February, and whichever party comes wins the election, and if they win enough votes to be able to form the government, or if they don't, and if there is a hung parliament, obviously there will be a coalition, and a prime minister will come into being. Now, in our constitution, the prime minister has certain powers and the president. So there is no clash of interest at all. It is the prime minister who will run Pakistan. But when you are talking of FATA now, that is the federally administered tribal agencies, there is a difference. The FATA comes directly under the governor and the president. So therefore, there is a degree of coordination required. Yes, indeed, there is a degree of harmony required in our actions to bring harmony into the tribal agencies. Now, it's only the southern tribal agencies which are more disturbed, the North and South Waziristan agency. And all that I have already said, we need to take a multi-pronged look at that, and which we are doing already. We are looking at the military aspect. We have to attack Al-Qaeda. We have to eliminate Al-Qaeda. We have to deal with Taliban, the militant Taliban. Now, these are our own people. So therefore, there is a military element required, and there is a political element required to wean away the population from these militant Taliban. And then there is a socio-economic element involved, which we are looking at. All this has to be done simultaneously. Obviously, the government has to back up the socio-economic side. But then there is a third element that we have to deal with in Pakistan and many other Muslim countries, I may say. The issue of extremism from the society. Now, although Pakistan is vastly moderate, but there are extremists who can be very aggressive. So therefore, extremism being a state of mind, we have to address this issue of extremism through another strategy which we have adopted, and we are going forward. So I would say that with a stable government and an understanding and harmony, political harmony, economic growth being sustained, that is the key. Otherwise we'll start going down. That is the key to success. Having ensured this, we need to go forth on the strategy, multi-pronged strategy that we have adopted to fight Al-Qaeda, Taliban, and extremism.
But President Musharraf, just picking up and building on John Chipman's question, from what we've heard from Afghanistan and Iraq, do you believe there is a legitimate and viable political track inside the Fatah at the moment to work in parallel with the military and security challenges you're working on?
I didn't get your question.
That there's a political track as well as a security and military track.
Yes.
We've just heard very clearly from President Karzai and the Deputy Prime Minister of Iraq that it's more than just security operations in the military.
Yes, indeed. That's what I always keep saying. The whole population is not fighting. They are not militants. When you're talking of Al-Qaeda in Pakistan, they are foreigners. Now, they have no right to be on our land without any valid documents, so therefore they have to be removed. When you talk of Taliban, now they are people from the population. The strategy ought to be twofold in Pakistan. Number one, wean away the population from joining all these who are for militancy. So that is where the political element is involved. The other part is deny any movement, trans-border movement between Afghanistan and Pakistan. By blocking the borders, no Pakistani should be allowed to go across for militancy, and no militant Taliban should be allowed to come into Pakistan.
But what I'm pressing is, what is the political track here that can be pursued in those areas as well?
Political track is not, if you're talking of elections. No, sir.
Well, no, afterwards, with these, we're looking for peace and stability.
Yes, indeed. In 2000, we thought that with 50 years of existence, Pakistan had not integrated this FATA region into the mainstream. So we initiated the process back in 2000. And we dealt with the tribal maliks, who are the leaders of their tribes, that let us integrate FATA into the into the frontier province. That should have gone on, but the unfortunate events of after 9/11, now the situation is different. And we need to wait and stabilize before we go on that track, because of a very big change that has occurred in the political realities of FATA. While previously it was tribal maliks, and we also call them lungi holders, the influential tribal notables, who used to wield influence over their tribes. After the emergence of Taliban, this political, military element or dominance to an extent started going into the hands of the Taliban, who did not enjoy any position of authority or position of eminence in the tribal hierarchy before. Now it is these clerics and militant Taliban who have come into being. So under these circumstances, if we go for any kind of a political transition at this moment, even at the local government level, maybe we will reach a place which will be more disturbing than what it is at the moment. So let us stabilize for the moment and then go for political transformation or integration into the mainstream.
President Musharraf, thank you. The view from Iraq on the rolling election idea, quickly.
Provincial Power Acts is before the Parliament. Parliament is debating it. This is a very crucial piece of legislation because it will define the character of the Iraqi state. At the moment, the draft law before Parliament involves devolving a lot of power from the center to the provinces, which is crucial for local democracy. Definitely there is a demand for early local elections, certainly from the Sunni areas, because the security situation when the last elections were held prevented majority of the population to take part in the elections. I'm personally for a rolling election because that will be less taxing on the system. We have too many challenges and we have had too many elections over the last 3-4 years. We want to focus on key priority areas, but I expect that there will be rolling elections sometime soon because the political demand from the local communities is really growing for that. And again, this will be part of the political track that we're talking about an inclusive system. People who felt that they were outside the system, outside the process a couple of years ago, it is incumbent upon us to create every opportunity for them to come into the system and for them to have a stake in the success of the system.
A lot of people want to intervene at the moment. Ken Roth from Human Rights Watch, and then there's another one over there. I haven't forgotten.
Thank you, Nick. My question is for President Musharraf. I very much welcome your pledge of free and fair elections on February 18th. I don't need to tell you that there's enormous fear in Pakistan that fraud might take place. And if there electoral fraud, and if there were allegations of fraud, the body that would ultimately resolve them would be the Pakistani Supreme Court. Now, as you know, when you declared emergency rule this past fall, you removed the independent justices on the court and replaced them with your hand-picked choices. Those people, I submit, would not have credibility to determine whether the election was free and fair or not. Would you reinstate the original independent judges so that any challenge of fraud could be heard by an independent Supreme Court?
Mr. President, this is about the issue of credibility of the system for an election.
Yes, indeed. First of all, on election fraud. Well, there is a system of elections in Pakistan which was there all along. It had certain bugs. It is through amendments to the laws made by my government that we have further ensured the fairness and transparency of the system. Like, for example, we have introduced the system of caretaker government. If we had any intentions of fraud, maybe the same government should have carried on and the elections would have taken place under those governments, under the same prime minister, same chief ministers. But we introduced this change. Another change that we introduced was the possible fraud which always the opposition tried in the past. that between the returning officer and the election commission, there is gerrymandering of results. We have introduced a law where the returning officer will announce the result and post it. Then there was an issue of ghost polling stations. Today, all the polling stations have been notified and they are on the internet for the whole world to know. Then there was an issue of electoral rolls and the credibility of the electoral rolls. We have now, the electoral rolls have been notified, they are on the internet. All this has been done. Then there was an issue that there was gerrymandering in the delimitation of constituencies. We disallowed that. No delimitation of constituencies. So this is the intention that we go along with. And may I also add that what existed in the past, the fairness at the grassroots level, at the level of the presiding officer of the polling station, at this level where people come to vote and cast their ballots, there are political agents of each candidate sitting right there. This presiding officer shows the empty ballot box and seals it. Previously this was a wooden box. Now we have spent money to make it into a transparent box. That also has been done for the first time this time. Now, after sealing, the ballots are cast right in front of every agent of every candidate. And then the count is done in front of every agent of every candidate. You tell me where the fraud can take place. So therefore, I am very sure that the election will be fair and transparent. Now, if you have any ideas of a further action to be done, I would be too pleased to give your ideas to the Chief Election Commission.
Ken Roth, do you have any other ideas, quickly? You don't have the microphone, but I'll get it to you, and you've got 30 seconds.
I mean, as I originally said, many people feel that despite these reforms, there is a tremendous danger of fraud. Even if your reforms are successful, there will be a challenge, and the credibility of that challenge is going to depend on the independence of the Supreme Court. So why not reinstate the independent justices rather than have your hand-picked cronies there?
I'll come to that. So do I take it that you have no other suggestion than what I have already said? So let me tell you that even if I get in Urdu there is a quotation that even if you get the stars and moon from the sky, and if you go to the opposition and you ask them, they will say there is a fraud. So therefore, it depends on who you are asking.
This is about the Supreme Court, Mr. President.
Now let's come to the Supreme Court. And I would like to ask you, if the Chief Justice of your country is involved in corruption, is nepotistic, and also he is influencing judgments of the lower courts for his own personal gains, what would you do to such a Chief Justice? Now, in our Constitution, there is a system. Every developing country, very humbly may I suggest, maybe we are not as developed countries, but we also have our system which you should understand. We have a constitution that we follow. This constitution is the constitution of Pakistan and not constitution of your country. In our constitution, there is a system. Nobody is above the law. Any misperforming judge or a Chief Justice a reference can be moved against him in a Supreme Judicial Council, which has 5 members, 3 senior-most Supreme Court judges, and 2 senior-most provincial high court judges. This has not been done by me. It is in the Constitution right from the beginning. So a reference was moved against this Chief Justice of Pakistan. What is so unconstitutional or unlawful about it that we did? So nothing unlawful, nothing unconstitutional. Then, if this same Chief Justice with his cronies tries to destabilize the system, the government system, in that the government gets paralyzed, in that the sovereignty of the parliament is challenged, the parliament who elects a president with 57% votes is denied notification of the result, and it is said that the Supreme Court will decide the issue, and the Supreme Court comes with a 7-member bench, and he realizes that the 7-member bench is going to pass a judgment in favor of me, who was the elected president. He makes it into a 9-member bench. He sees that 9-member bench is also going to pass a favorable judgment. He makes it into an 11-member bench, makes a mockery of the system. How would you address this situation in your country? That is why I keep saying, please look at Pakistan from Pakistan's eyes and not from any foreign eyes. You should see our performance on how the governance is going, whether the welfare of people is being addressed, whether economic well-being of the country is being addressed, and we are moving forward. And not with the eyes of your misperceived ideas of human rights or Western views on human rights and democracy, which I keep saying. We also believe in them, but give us some time to adopt all that you have achieved in centuries.
Right.
So
well, let's accept there are differences here and move on, please, at the back. Say again, please.
Manfred Ketz de Vries, INSEAD Global Leadership Center. I have a question which is probably relevant to all the leaders on the podium. Over the last years, we have seen an explosion, and no pun intended, of the cult of suicide bombers. What long-term educational measures are you taking to do something about it?
Who would like to come to that? Deputy Prime Minister.
I think this question is very relevant. What we are suffering from in the Islamic world, not just the Arab world, in the Islamic world at large, is disenchanted communities, poverties, and standard of educations that have gone down and down over decades. Dealing with terrorism and dealing with this phenomena of suicide bombings cannot be dealt with just by security means. It can be dealt with through development, job creations, and definitely improving the standards of education in our countries.
Do you see a direct correlation on that?
Not necessarily as such, but we're talking about the environment that breeds extremism. Some of these suicide bombers are fairly well educated, as we've seen in September 11 for that matter. We're talking about the environment that breeds terrorism. That environment is really primarily emanating from bad governments, repression, as well as lack of development and bad standards of education. That is certainly a crucial area of emphasis in order to defeat the scourge of terrorism and extremism.
You wanted to come back?
Yeah, one point only. I think you're very right in that observation, but what about more religious leaders speaking out against this cult of suicide bombing? I have seen very little of that to be any more united.
As a Muslim, I think that your question again is very relevant. As a Muslim, I would say there are efforts by extremists to hijack my religion. My understanding of Islam is one, that of tolerance, that of peace, that of respect for human life and dignity. Yet there are people who justify slaughtering innocent people in the name of Islam and in the name of Allah. Definitely, there is a need for reforming the religious establishment and making sure that the religious establishment throughout the Islamic world will stand up in fighting the scourge of terrorism. In my country, Iraq, we have been afflicted by this tornado of terrorism day in, day out over the last 4 years. Very few religious leaders outside Iraq have stood up and spoke against that evil. Yet when there is an incident in another country, you see, for political convenience, many people speaking out. But I think there needs to be a united effort by religious leaders, political leaders in the Islamic world and beyond to combat this scourge.
President Karzai, you seem to be facing, correct me if I'm wrong, an increase in this phenomenon, not just because of the Serena Hotel, which obviously got international headlines. In other words, do you fear that you're not able to prevent this in the way that you would like to? No. I'm talking about President Karzai.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, you can speak for me. No. Go ahead. It's a much deeper problem with serious roots in the past 3-4 decades. The rise of extremism and the consequence of terrorism as a result of that is not because of religious extremism alone, or because of an ideology, or because of the much propagated clash of civilizations as we see around the press today. Extremism was given room and was promoted by a certain environment of rivalry between the communist Soviet and the rest of the world, that is the West and the Islamic world together. This rise in extremism, as it was promoted, was also in our part of the world given a lot more support as a tool of policy. The consequence of that is now dire and serious for all of us. When a bomber goes to kill school children in Afghanistan and parliamentarians, when a man thinking that he is pious goes and decapitates an elderly woman, or when some in the name of the Taliban, who probably are not the Taliban, take a 15-year-old boy from his mother and take him to a room and burn him with gas cylinders till the morning, and then deliver the charcoal burnt body to the mother. This is beyond imagination, even for the crudest of minds. Therefore, the solution to this really lies in all of us, the whole of the world. As the Deputy Prime Minister of Iraq said, it has nothing to do with Islam, nothing at all. For if they were doing it in the name of Islam, or if they were thinking that they were Muslims and doing it for a cause of Islam, they wouldn't go to kill people in Peshawar who had gone to pray for Eid. The man went to the mosque and blew himself up there while people were praying for Eid. Another man went and blew himself up again in Peshawar when there was this mourning procession for Ashura. Therefore, it isn't religious. It is criminal. Criminal gone completely beyond imagination and control. It has actually become a business, unfortunately, in certain cases, for all of us. They use drug addicts. They use people who are terminally ill and very, very, very poor. They go to the family and say, we need the man who is going to die anyway. We'll pay you a certain amount of money, and he will be blown up, and he will go to heaven. So it's a problem not only for our region, not only for the Arab world, not for the Islamic world. It's a problem for the whole of us, the whole of humanity. Therefore, it requires an effort on behalf of all of us in sincerity and sternness.
Fakhruddin, Ahmed, just to be clear, is this something which is on your security and social agenda in the Prime Minister's office in Bangladesh?
Not in that sense, but obviously this is something which we have to keep in mind. And I'd like to suggest that one of the ways that I think we can approach the problem, it's a problem of extremism, whether the extreme form is suicide bombing, of course, is a society must be inclusive of its members in terms of economic activities, in terms of the political activities, and the sense of belongingness must be generated there. That's one part of it, and that's really what I think the process that I described, that the Bangladesh, there is a sort of a quiet social changes that have been going on, is I think ultimately is going to help us in this regard as well. On the other hand, these are, as just have been said by President Karzai, criminal activities, and therefore they must be fought under the law. And that's what we at this government, our government also has been trying to do. In the sense that there have been incidents of bombings in the past. Now, when this government came to power, we opened up the investigation of all those cases which somehow or other had not been completed during the earlier regimes. So we are going after any of these extremists, wherever they are in Bangladesh. We have really apprehended some of them, and they are going through trials under the laws of the land. So we are approaching it in these two different ways. But let me again emphasize that ultimately it's the economic development, participation of the people in that process and getting the fruits of that process ultimately is going to really be the major plank for getting out of such situations.
President Musharraf, there will be many who say your policies have actually exacerbated this issue and the challenge for you both security-wise and socially.
I totally reject it. Short answer.
But the issue of combating suicide bombing, how do you believe you are going to combat it, given what you're seeing in your country?
Combating suicide bombing, as has been brought out very correctly by everyone, has a religious aspect and a socio-economic aspect. Poverty and illiteracy is at the core. So therefore, it has a short-term aspect of addressing it, and in the short term, we need to get to people who are indoctrinating misled, uneducated, deprived individuals towards suicide bombing. So we have to get them, get that route, and that is what we are following. We know that most of the suicide bombings in Pakistan lead back to one individual in South Waziristan agency. So getting him means drying the source. We are doing that. The other is a long-term strategy. Now, who are these youngsters, as President Karzai brought out, who can be indoctrinated to blow themselves up? They are those who are very poor and who are totally illiterate. I have seen the videos of 3 of them. They are generally youngsters, and I also agree with President Karzai that maybe they are mentally a little below normal. And the 3 CDs that I have seen, this youngster standing with the suicide belt, and he's addressing to his mother and father and his brothers and sisters that I am very fine. I'm going to heavens, and I'm opening the way for all of you to come to heaven. Now this is his illiteracy, and also if he is miserable in this life, he thinks that he's going to be some kind of a VIP in heavens. So that is how he lives. So it's in the long term we need to address the issue of poverty and illiteracy, and that is what we are doing. And that is why I say, let us concentrate on the economic uplift of the country and the welfare and well-being of the people. Every country must perform on this, and that must be the gauge, the basic gauge of progress.
Let's take at least one more question. Of course, we have to underline it's a problem around the world, not just with your countries, including the country I come from, as confirmed by MI5 and others. Please, Shashi Tharoor.
Shashi Tharoor from India. President Musharraf, in all the recent focus on the domestic situation in your country, we've slightly lost sight of the Indo-Pakistan peace process, and I wonder if you can enlighten us as to how you feel that's going, if it's going, and where you think it should be heading. But before I ask you to answer that, sir, President Karzai, you made a very interesting comment a few minutes ago in answering the earlier question, where you said that in your region, extremism has been a tool of policy. And I wondered whether you could clarify what you meant by that, because in the past we have heard you say that you were concerned that some of the terrorism, or much of the terrorism in Afghanistan, comes from across the border. Is that what you mean, that there is a policy to export terrorism to your country? And could you tell us whether you've seen any changes in that policy?
Mr. Tharoor, I just finished a very good trip with President Musharraf in Islamabad. So let's stop it there.
Thank you.
President Musharraf, could I just add, do you believe that the track with India is now on the way to guaranteeing peace and stability across the mutual border between India and Pakistan?
Yeah, when I said we need to resolve political disputes, because that lies at the core of terrorism, extremism, I spoke of Palestine. What I didn't mention was Kashmir, because it has affected the internal psyche in our country. The emotional attachment of people with Kashmir gave rise to dozens, if not hundreds, of mercenary groups, mujahideen elements, going independently, operating independently. So therefore we need to resolve that. And may I say very with full satisfaction we got onto a bilateral track of resolution of all disputes between India and Pakistan, which were going very well. This included the resolution of the Kashmir dispute. In the last few months, yes indeed, we got sidetracked. But may I say again, let me give you the positive side, that we want to get it back on track. There is an urge from both sides to get the bilateral peace track back on track. And I think after the elections, especially where we are too involved in now, with stable political environment in Pakistan, we must go strongly towards resolution of disputes between India and Pakistan so that we can have a very stable government.
One final question, please, quick.
Deputy Prime Minister Salih, how long should the...
Just introduce yourself, please.
Vivek Randive from California. How long should the United States stay in Iraq, and how would the majority of Iraqis respond to that question?
In other words, do you need the US presence to guarantee long-term peace and stability?
I think overwhelming majority of Iraqis would not like to see foreign troops on their soil. And I dare say also that overwhelming majority of Americans would like to see their troops back home. But we live in an interconnected world, and the challenges that we deal with in Iraq are of consequence to the United States. Reality is that we have a very serious security environment. We are developing our security capabilities. Today, 9 provinces of the 18 provinces of Iraq are under total Iraqi security control. When we assumed sovereignty in 2004, the security services of Iraq were minimal, non-significant. Today, we have more than 560,000 people under arm. This is work in progress. Our expectations that we would need the Americans to be in a supporting role in Iraq for some time to come. That is why we have announced our intention, joint intention, Iraq and the United States, to negotiate a long-term partnership, both security and economic. I hope that this will help stabilize Iraq and fend off regional predators who may want to destabilize the situation in Iraq.
Thank you very much. What's come through is the urgency of multiple tracks when it comes to guaranteeing peace and stability with every different country's challenges. Sadly, we have to leave it at that point. Can I thank you all very much indeed? And thank you.
Always. Pleasure.